Many times when I do this program, this channel, probably about 70% of the time, I'm usually complaining about things. And it's negative to complain. But I feel like that when I complain about something on this channel, whatever I'm doing my commentary on, it's important to try to find solutions to move this country forward, move the world forward in a lot of ways. And but I am happy to say that this might be the hard 30% of the time that I'm going to share some positive news that I find very positive, and I would like to share it with you too. In February of this past year, the Virginia General Assembly voted in favor of abolishing the death penalty in the state of Virginia. The bill was submitted to Governor Ralph Norton, and he signed the bill on March 23rd, 2021, officially abolishing the death penalty in Virginia. Not only is abolishing the death penalty important in itself, it's also very symbolic. Virginia became the first U.S. state in the South to abolish the death penalty. And as a lifelong opponent of capital punishment, I want to say to the Virginia General Assembly and to Governor Ralph Norton, thank you very much for what you did. Thank you, because the death penalty is immoral, and I am 100% opposed to capital punishment. It's never made any sense since I was a little kid understanding the concept. It's never, ever made any sense to have the death penalty. North Carolina, I figured North Carolina would have been the first state. If there would have been a state that would abolish the death penalty, I figured North Carolina would have been the first state to do so. Because North Carolina, in spite of having things like Jesse Helms in the past or what have you, which is a stain on North Carolina's political legacy, North Carolina has always had a reputation of being a cut above and a little more progressive than the rest of the South. Um, in fact, I would have said there would have been a time I would have told you that Virginia's politics compared to North Carolina was technically more conservative than here in the next state away, here in North Carolina. I grew up in the northeastern part of the state. I am no stranger to Virginia, even though I was technically in North Carolina. Most of the cable television stations came out of Virginia. A lot of radio stations I was listening to came out of Virginia. Uh, my parents would subscribe to the Virginia Pilot because and we knew what was going on in Virginia just as much as our home state of North Carolina. That was during my formative years. And so Virginia has always struck me as a very conservative state, very, very reactionary in a lot of ways in comparison to North Carolina, in spite of having someone like a clown like Jesse Helms as a U.S. senator. But I'm grateful for what Virginia did. Now, North Carolina voted to have a moratorium on capital punishment about back in 2005, I believe. I don't hope I'm not wrong saying that. I know we had a moratorium. I think it was 2004, 2005. We had a moratorium for a few years. It isn't abolishing the death penalty, but moratorium suspends capital punishment for a time so studies can be made to find out whether how effective the death penalty is, or is it racially biased, and what would be the best effects of not having a death penalty versus retaining the death penalty. So a moratorium was far less than what I wanted, but during that time we had the moratorium, we were suspending executions, and that was a positive step. But Virginia won up it, and thank you, Virginia, for what you did. abolishing the death penalty. Now, as I said, I am a lifelong opponent of capital punishment. I have always opposed the death penalty, and the reasons should be clear. Common sense dictates that no society should have the death penalty. But I'll tell you why here in the United States, why the death penalty is not just fundamentally wrong, but evil to have it. The death penalty, for all intents and purposes, is racist. I am not saying that if you support the death penalty, you're a racist. I am saying that the death penalty, the institution of having a death penalty, has racist outcomes. It heavily discriminates against African Americans and maybe to a slightly smaller extent, Hispanics, Native Americans, and actual poor whites. Now, when it comes to the issue of race, some people there were people trying to come up with a death penalty effectiveness act or something along those lines back in the 1990s, which would put a racial quota on the death penalty, basically saying, well, since blacks is 12% of the population, we're going to have the death penalty. We'll only execute 12% of the blacks. We'll execute the 70% of the white population who's on death row. No, 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 no. Don't have the death penalty at all. The death penalty is evil. I don't care who's on death row, whether it's a white person, an African American, or whatever other racial or ethnic group. It's wrong to have the death penalty. Completely wrong, wrong, wrong. 100%. Abolish it. The death penalty is also classist. As I said, it is racist, but it's also discriminating against class. Usually, you don't hear wealthy or well-to-do white people being on death row. When you see a white person on death row, it's usually lower income and have the worst circumstances done to that person in life. I don't believe in cultural relativism, and having a death penalty is non-Western or anti-Western. It's an anti-Western concept. It's an anti-Western value. It's unenlightened. You look at countries that abolish the death penalty. Yeah, and that's pretty much every country in Europe. That's pretty much the majority of Latin America. It is Australia, New Zealand. They don't have the death penalty. And yes, there are a handful of countries in Africa that don't have the death penalty either. South Africa, when they abolished apartheid, one of the first things they did was to abolish the death penalty. Now, Europe had the death penalty in most of the countries. It was in Eastern Europe, the communist nations under the Soviet Union, the Warsaw Pact nations. They had the death penalty. When the Berlin Wall fell down, what the first thing happened to these former communist states when the death penalty, when communism was toppled peacefully in virtually all of Eastern Europe, with the exception of Romania. Romania, it was violent, but point is, 89, 1990, the communism collapsed and the Soviet Union ceased to exist in 1991. All those Eastern European countries that was part of the Warsaw Pact, one of the first things they did was to abolish the death penalty. When you think about societies that practice the death penalty in today's world, they're not democracies. They're despotic regimes that oppresses people. Whether it's the handful of overtly communist states that exist after the Cold War, they practice the death penalty, or whether it's a military dictatorship, or whether it's a ultra religious government in the Middle East and some of these various countries, like Saudi Arabia, for example, a religious state that's governed by a monarchy. They practice the death penalty. Even Western societies historically, such as fascist governments in Italy, Nazi Germany, Spain and Portugal, although their fascism was a little bit softer than the type that existed in Italy and in Germany. practiced the death penalty. Once the fascism left, no more death penalty. West Germany got rid of the death penalty in 1954, and in 1989, East Germany got rid of the death penalty. Spain got rid of the death penalty after the death of Franco. After the Antonio Salazar government of Portugal was toppled in 1974, the death penalty was abolished. The death penalty was abolished after World War II in Italy. So democratic societies abolish the death penalty. Totalitarian governments keeps the death penalty. Here in the United States, we have several. I would say right now, as it stands, 23 states do not have capital punishment. And most of the states, thankfully, that do have capital punishment are not putting it to usage. Unfortunately, there's Texas, there's Florida, and I think that Virginia was pretty aggressive using the death penalty when they had it too. We don't need it, folks. We really do not need it. As I said, it's totalitarian, it's anti-Western, it's classist, and it's also racist. And probably the most important reason not to have the death penalty, even if you can make it racially unbiased, and you can make it, classist unbiased, and you can keep justice blind. Here's another fundamental problem with having a death penalty. What if somebody was framed and sentenced to death for a crime they didn't commit? Abolishing the death penalty tomorrow in all 50 states, in every U.S. territory, and in the federal government will not cause a crime spree to break out. But you know what will happen if we abolish the death penalty in all 50 states, every U.S. territory, and on the federal government level? We'll be joining the family of nations around the world that abolished the death penalty, whether it's Great Britain, or whether it's France, or whether it's Norway, Australia. I don't care. As I said, civilized societies do not use the death penalty. Dictatorships, totalitarian societies utilize the death penalty. It's also unconstitutional. It's forbidden by our Eighth Amendment, which prohibits cruel and unusual punishment. And as for some of the religious-minded people that want to use Scripture to justify capital punishment, Pope Francis is opposed to capital punishment. Most mainline Protestant churches in the United States are opposed to capital punishment. Most Jewish organizations are opposed to capital punishment. Most secular movements are opposed to capital punishment. People, it's time for the United States to abolish the death penalty. If you like what you heard, press like and comment. If you disagree, comment anyway. We'll have a conversation. Feel free to share the content on this channel. As a First Amendment absolutist, it's my duty to inform you that if you're passionate about something, create a platform and utilize it, because we're the muckrakers of our time. And most importantly, feel free to subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell so you're kept up to date with my commentaries. And until next time, class warfare yesterday, today, tomorrow, until we have full economic and social justice for all.